Millionaire husband regrets hugging mistress when he sees his poor wife being proposed to by a CEO. Jonathan Montgomery believed he had it all: a vast estate overlooking the Hudson River, a successful business with global reach, and a radiant wife whose gentle smile lit up every elegant party they attended. But beneath the shimmering layers of designer suits and lavish galas, something was amiss. Something Jonathan refused to acknowledge. Blinded by wealth and the promise of endless affection, he thought he was untouchable. Little did he know, a single moment, a fleeting hug with the wrong woman would threaten everything. What happens when the once devoted wife, humiliated and heartbroken, receives a proposal from someone even more powerful than Jonathan himself? Jonathan Montgomery was the kind of man who commanded attention wherever he went. Tall, with sharp brown eyes and a confident stride, he seemed permanently cloaked in an aura of success. Rumor had it that the Montgomery fortune began decades ago, with his grandfather mining precious metals in the mountains of Colorado. By the time his father, Richard Montgomery, inherited the wealth, it had expanded into real estate, technology startups, and even philanthropic endeavors. Jonathan himself followed in the family footsteps, further growing their enterprises with a keen eye for rising industries. Anyone who glanced through the glossy pages of American Business Quarterly would see his beaming face, often next to his poised and elegant wife, Evelyn. They were the embodiment of a power couple. Evelyn Montgomery was no stranger to the demands of high society. Her roots were humbler. She'd grown up in a tight-knit family outside of Cleveland, working her way through college with scholarships and part-time jobs. Meeting Jonathan had felt like stumbling into a fairy tale. She was smitten not just by the glitz but by Jonathan's fierce ambition. Together, they seemed unstoppable. Their regal home in Westchester County boasted marble floors, golden chandeliers imported from Italy, and breathtaking views of the Hudson. It was a place fit for lavish gatherings, charitable galas, and private business negotiations. Every corner whispered of affluence and tradition: the carved mahogany banister in the grand foyer, the antique paintings carefully curated from Sotheby's auctions, and the meticulously trimmed gardens that sprawled across acres, hosting rare orchids and exotic koi ponds. But money and fine decor only told part of the story. Once the guests left and the hush of night set in, you could sense an emotional gap between husband and wife. Their bedroom, large enough to house a small family's entire apartment, felt cold. The bed, draped in Egyptian cotton sheets, was often half empty by sunrise. Jonathan's busy schedule had him flying from New York to London to Tokyo, sometimes on a moment's notice, while Evelyn found herself alone, stirring her morning tea at a table for two. It wasn't that Jonathan didn't love Evelyn. In the beginning, he truly did. But over the years, the demands of his global empire began to overshadow the warmth of their relationship. Text messages replaced tender conversations. Business calls ran late into the night, drowning out the gentle whispers that once bound them together. Evelyn felt a growing sense of isolation. She tried to busy herself with charitable work. She volunteered at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's events whenever possible and organized fundraisers for children's hospitals across the state. Still, that hollow feeling persisted. To the public, the Montgomerys were the epitome of marital bliss. Cameras captured them smiling at black-tie galas, clasping each other's hands at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Society columns praised their generosity and applauded Evelyn's refined fashion sense, her shimmering gowns and impeccable taste in jewelry. Even close friends like Bianca Hastings and Mark Peterson, who had known them for years, were convinced the Montgomerys would last forever. And why wouldn't they? Jonathan gifted Evelyn with a new luxury car on their anniversary each year. He'd whisk her away on spontaneous weekend trips to the Maldives or Paris, layering experiences upon experiences as though each new memory would overshadow the unspoken distance. Evelyn smiled through it all, ever the gracious hostess, always the perfect companion. But beneath her calm exterior, a subtle ache grew. Every so often, as Jonathan left their mansion with a quick kiss on the cheek, Evelyn wondered, is this really what happiness looks like? And each time she voiced such doubts, she'd brush them away almost instantly. After all, they had built a life many envied. They had wealth, prestige, admiration. Surely nothing could shake the foundation of such a grand existence. Yet cracks were forming, hairline fractures in the polished marble of their marriage. The closeness they once shared had faded, replaced by polite pleasantries and carefully maintained illusions. They still looked the part of a united couple, but behind closed doors the laughter was muted and the affection teetered on the brink of vanishing. No one, not even Evelyn, dared to think those fractures might expand. Not until an event would shatter the equilibrium, an event as simple and destructive as a forbidden hug. Little did they know, the world they painstakingly built was about to be tested in a way that would change their lives forever. Evelyn woke the next morning to an empty space beside her. Jonathan had left at dawn for a business meeting in Manhattan. The city was buzzing with news that the famed technology mogul Lawrence Chen would be expanding his investment portfolio in New York. Jonathan, always on the hunt for lucrative partnerships, had eagerly arranged a breakfast meeting. Sighing, Evelyn shuffled to her walk-in closet. Rows of designer clothes, shoes and handbags greeted her, a testament to Jonathan's generosity. She selected a modest yet elegant knee-length dress, a pastel mint color that reminded her of spring gardens. Fitting attire for the day's agenda, volunteering at a local children's hospital fundraiser. Downstairs, Maria, their longtime housekeeper, greeted Evelyn with a warm smile and a fresh pot of jasmine tea. "Morning, Miss S. Montgomery," she said softly. "Will you be home for dinner with Mr. Montgomery?" Evelyn forced a pleasant grin. "I'm not sure, Maria. Jonathan has back-to-back meetings. But let's prepare something light, in case he comes home late." Maria nodded, concern etched on her face. She'd been with the Montgomerys for many years and had watched the couple drift apart. She often heard Evelyn pacing quietly through the empty hallways at night, and she noticed how rarely Jonathan's side of the bed seemed slept in. But Maria, ever loyal, kept her observations to herself. Evelyn arrived at the hospital around mid-morning. Bright balloons adorned the lobby and dedicated volunteers bustled about, setting up tables for silent auctions and distributing pamphlets about pediatric research. Evelyn was in her element here. She loved the sense of purpose, the earnest smiles, and the knowledge that her time and resources could make a difference. She chatted easily with doctors, nurses, and fellow volunteers, her graceful presence lending the event a certain prestige. Amid the flurry of activity, she checked her phone, scanning for any messages from Jonathan. Nothing. A day without even a quick text was not unusual, but it chipped away at her spirits. "He's probably just busy," she told herself, tucking the phone away in her handbag. Yet an undertone of sadness lingered. After several hours of fundraising, she headed to a nearby cafe with Bianca Hastings, one of her closest friends since college. Bianca was sharp-tongued but fiercely loyal, the kind of companion who'd show up at your doorstep at 3 a.m. if you needed a shoulder to cry on. Over warm bowls of tomato soup, Bianca leveled Evelyn with a direct look. "How are things at home, Evie?" Evelyn stiffened slightly. "Fine," she said, attempting a calm tone. "Busy as usual. You know Jonathan, he's always working on some new deal." Bianca's gaze didn't waver. "Look, I've known you two since you first started dating. You used to talk about everything, little jokes, big dreams, even silly fears. Now every time I see you, you're alone. If something's wrong, you can tell me." Evelyn managed a small smile. It's just the way life evolves, Bianca. We're both busy. Jonathan's business is growing, and I have my charity work. We're just in a different phase, or drifting apart. Bianca pressed, concern shining in her eyes. Evie, I'm worried about you. Evelyn gently squeezed her friend's hand. I appreciate you, but I'm fine, really. She paused, feeling the weight of her words. But if things do get overwhelming, you'll be the first to know. Promise. They parted with a warm embrace. Evelyn felt a flicker of relief. Bianca, with her directness, was the reality check Evelyn sometimes needed. Yet, as she walked back to her car, she couldn't shake the sense that, despite her protests, she was on a lonely island of her own making. That night, Jonathan didn't return until nearly midnight. Evelyn was waiting in the living room, a magazine in her lap, the grand chandelier above casting soft light around her. When Jonathan finally walked in, he seemed more exhausted than usual, dark rings under his eyes, tie loosened, suit jacket draped over his arm. "You're still up," he murmured. "I'm sorry I'm late. The meeting with Lawrence Chen ran longer than expected. Then I had to meet with some potential European investors." Evelyn offered a tentative smile. "I understand. I saved dinner for you, but we can reheat it if you're hungry." Jonathan shook his head, collapsing onto the couch. "Thanks, but I grabbed something on the way. I appreciate the thought." He looked at her, noticing how she was dressed in a soft robe, hair pulled back in a casual bun. Something about her poised silhouette against the glow of the chandelier made him think of the early days when he would have rushed home just to share a simple meal. But just as quickly, the moment passed. He averted his gaze, rummaging through his phone. "I'll head up soon. Just need to finalize some notes." Evelyn nodded. "All right. Good night," she said softly, heading upstairs. She felt that same ache return, the one she couldn't quite name. Something in his voice, in his distant stare, tugged at her heart. She wanted to pull him into a tight embrace, to remind him they were partners and lovers, not just two people living under the same roof. But the gap between them felt too wide to cross in a single step. Jonathan watched her walk away, a pang of guilt flickering in his chest. He told himself he was doing this all for their future, for the legacy of the Montgomery name. But as he scrolled through his messages, he couldn't shake the haunting thought, what if, in the process of chasing success, I lose the one person who matters most? A month later, Jonathan found himself at a high-profile gala in Midtown Manhattan. Hosted at the opulent Plaza Hotel, the event was a fundraiser for international children's education initiatives. Jonathan was an invited speaker, set to deliver remarks about philanthropy in the modern business world. Evelyn had initially planned to accompany him, but an unexpected illness in her family required her to fly to Cleveland that morning. Although she hated to miss these events, she couldn't ignore her sister's plea for support. Jonathan navigated the swirling throng of dignitaries, corporate giants, and well-known celebrities. He recognized real-world philanthropists like Richard Branson and Bill Gates amidst the crowd, exchanging polite handshakes. The luxurious interior, adorned with gold leaf and sparkling chandeliers, provided a fitting backdrop for the wealthy elite to mingle. During a pause between speeches, Jonathan retreated to the gala's mezzanine, seeking a moment to review his notes. That was when he first noticed her, Vanessa Delgado. She was perched at a small, elegantly decorated table, swirling her champagne flute with practiced ease. Vanessa exuded a striking presence, long raven hair, bright green eyes, and a self-assured posture that suggested she belonged in these elite circles. She was engaged in quiet conversation with a man Jonathan recognized as a well-known publisher. When the publisher excused himself, Vanessa's gaze swept the room and landed on Jonathan. She smiled, a subtle curve of her lips, and beckoned him over. Never one to shy from introductions, Jonathan approached. "Jonathan Montgomery," he said, extending a hand. "I don't believe we've met." She shook his hand gracefully. "Vanessa Delgado, it's a pleasure. I've heard your speech is one of the highlights of the evening." Jonathan suppressed a modest laugh. "I hope I don't disappoint." "And you? Are you here on behalf of one of the charities?" Vanessa leaned in, the faint scent of jasmine perfume wafting from her. "I'm on the board of an international relief organization. We provide scholarships for girls in developing countries. This gala is crucial to our fundraising. But let's be honest, these events are as much about networking as they are about doing good, aren't they?" He nodded, intrigued. "Sometimes, yes. Though I like to think we still do genuine good, despite the glitz and glamour." Vanessa offered an elegant shrug. "Absolutely. But one must also be practical." She tilted her head, studying him. "I'm familiar with the Montgomery legacy. Your family has quite a reputation for philanthropy." Jonathan felt a swell of pride. "We do what we can. My wife Evelyn is very active in hospital fundraisers. She's actually away right now, family emergency, but usually she'd be right by my side at an event like this." Vanessa's expression softened. "I hope everything's all right with your family. It's wonderful that your wife supports your philanthropic vision. Not all spouses take an active role." There was nothing overtly seductive in her tone, yet Jonathan sensed an undercurrent of intensity in her words, a confidence that drew him in. They spent the next half hour exchanging stories. Vanessa recounted her experiences traveling through refugee camps in war-torn regions, while Jonathan spoke of Evelyn's hospital initiatives and his father's vision for a more equitable world. Soon, an announcement called Jonathan to the stage. He delivered his speech, weaving personal anecdotes with the broader importance of charity. Thunderous applause followed. Afterward, he felt more than a few interested gazes from the women at the gala, but it was Vanessa's lingering, thoughtful attention that snagged his awareness. She approached him near the buffet area. "You speak passionately about change," she commented, retrieving a fresh glass of champagne. "It's refreshing in a room often dominated by vanity projects." Jonathan smiled. "I've been taught that true philanthropy requires a personal touch, but I'd love to hear more about your work." He glanced at his watch. "If you aren't rushing off, perhaps I could walk you out." Vanessa lifted an eyebrow but nodded. "I'd like that." They strolled through the corridors of the plaza, the echo of their footsteps weaving through conversations and laughter. Outside, the night air was crisp, the city lights painting the sky in neon. A sleek limousine was waiting for Jonathan, and a town car stood ready for Vanessa. Before parting, she slipped him her card. "Vanessa Delgado, Global Outreach Director, Delgado Foundation. Contact me anytime," she said softly, the faint city glow illuminating her confident smile. "I suspect we can collaborate on something meaningful." Jonathan pocketed the card, feeling a stir of excitement that was more than just professional. But he pushed the thought aside, reminding himself that he was a married man. Still, as he rode home in the limousine, he replayed their conversation in his mind, unable to deny her magnetic pull. 2 days later, Vanessa emailed him, suggesting they meet for lunch to discuss potential joint projects. Jonathan agreed. After all, there was no harm in a professional meeting, especially if it benefited charity. Yet he felt a flutter of anticipation as he typed out his response, setting a time at a chic midtown restaurant. Was it the thrill of a new venture, or was it something else entirely? That question lingered in the back of his mind as he went about his day. By the time he returned home that night, he found Evelyn asleep in bed, having just arrived back from Cleveland. Jonathan planted a gentle kiss on her forehead, but she barely stirred. Standing there, watching her serene face, he told himself he had done nothing wrong. He was simply expanding philanthropic horizons. Yet something deep within him whispered that a line had been drawn and crossing it would change everything. 3 weeks later, Jonathan sat at an exclusive midtown eatery, scanning the finely printed lunch menu. He adjusted his cufflinks and glanced at his phone, half expecting a text from Evelyn asking about his day. She usually checked in around noon, but recently her messages had become sporadic. Their communication had dwindled to a trickle of practicalities, household matters, upcoming social events, or updates on each other's schedules. Vanessa arrived precisely on time, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Heads turned as she made her way to Jonathan's table, a casual elegance in her stride. She wore a tailored navy dress with subtle gold accents, exuding an air of understated luxury. Jonathan stood to greet her, offering a courteous handshake that somehow felt more intimate than it should. "Punctuality," she commented, smiling. "Always a good sign." They settled into their chairs, and Vanessa wasted no time diving into conversation. She outlined the Delgado Foundation's newest outreach programs, educational grants for underprivileged children in Southeast Asia, healthcare initiatives in rural Africa, disaster relief funds in Central America. Jonathan listened intently, noting how thoroughly she understood every detail, from the budgets to the logistical challenges of deploying aid in remote locations. As the waiter took their orders, she leaned in. "I've seen your family name attached to various philanthropic ventures, Jonathan, but I wonder if there's a personal cause close to your heart." He paused, momentarily caught off guard. He thought about Evelyn's dedication to children's hospitals and how she poured her heart into local community projects. "My wife is particularly passionate about pediatric healthcare," he said, stirring the ice in his water glass. "I've focused more on funding medical research institutes. It's a bit broad, I suppose, but I want to foster real innovation." Vanessa nodded, eyes alive with curiosity. "Innovation is crucial, but so is personal connection. Sometimes, when philanthropy becomes too big, it loses that human touch." Her words echoed a sentiment Jonathan had shared in his speech at the gala. He was surprised by how thoroughly Vanessa had paid attention. Their conversation wove between personal beliefs and pragmatic strategies. He found himself relaxing, enjoying her company in a way he rarely did with new acquaintances. Before the main course arrived, Vanessa pulled out a neatly organized folder, showcasing potential collaborations. "Here are some project outlines," she said. "Your foundation could collaborate with ours, or we could establish a joint venture. Imagine the impact if we combine resources." Jonathan flipped through the documents. "This is comprehensive," he remarked, impressed by her thorough planning. "I'd need to run this by my board, but I see a lot of potential for synergy." She smiled, pleased. "I knew you'd be open to it. Your track record suggested as much." There it was again, that quiet confidence that simultaneously intrigued and unsettled him. He reminded himself that this was strictly business, but he couldn't deny the spark in her presence. A fleeting thought crossed his mind. What if I spent more time with someone like her, driven, passionate, electric? Then guilt pressed down. "You're married, Jonathan. Remember your vows, your history, your wife." Determined to remain professional, he refocused on the folder's contents. After the meal, they lingered over coffee. The conversation drifted from philanthropy to personal anecdotes, from shared jokes about life in high society to stories of global travel. Vanessa recounted a hair-raising experience during a hurricane relief mission. Jonathan spoke of his father's philanthropic philosophy. They laughed at the realization that they'd both attended the same conference in London years ago, though they hadn't met then. Eventually, Jonathan glanced at his watch. "I hate to cut this short, but I have a meeting in half an hour across town." Vanessa placed her cup down. "Of course. Thank you for your time. I look forward to hearing your feedback on the collaboration." They rose from the table. Outside, the sun shone bright, and New York's frenetic energy enveloped them. Taxis whizzed by and pedestrians bustled in every direction. For a moment, they stood together at the curb, the weight of the city's rush swirling around them. Vanessa extended her hand. "I'm glad we had this chance to talk in depth. Let's not let it be the last." Jonathan nodded, placing her business folder under his arm. "We'll be in touch soon. Thanks for meeting on such short notice." Her eyes flickered with something akin to warmth. "Anytime." He hailed a cab and slid into the back seat, giving the driver an address on the Upper East Side. As the car pulled away, Jonathan caught a final glimpse of Vanessa standing on the sidewalk, confident and captivating against the city backdrop. A hint of unease crept over him. He sensed he was teetering at the edge of a precipice, but couldn't quite pull himself back. "It's just business," he told himself, but the nagging voice inside whispered otherwise. 3 blocks later, his phone buzzed an incoming text from Evelyn. "Hey, how's your day going?" "Thinking of you." He stared at the screen, feeling both warmth and guilt wash over him in equal measure. He typed back a quick reply, short, almost formal. Then he powered his phone off. He needed time to think, to compose himself. Was he merely excited about a promising new partnership? Or was something far more dangerous unfolding under the guise of philanthropy? Jonathan didn't know, and that uncertainty was both thrilling and terrifying. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan immersed himself in the potential collaboration with Vanessa's foundation. Emails flew back and forth at all hours, peppered with carefully considered proposals and budget outlines. Conference calls that began formally often ended with a few minutes of playful banter. He justified the late-night phone chats as necessary for philanthropic progress after all. Bridging time zones demanded flexibility. Evelyn noticed the subtle shifts in Jonathan's behavior, the surreptitious texts under the dinner table, the sudden hush that fell when she entered his home office. Yet she could not pinpoint the source of her growing apprehension. She told herself Jonathan was working on a massive new initiative. He had always been ambitious, so it wasn't unusual for him to pour himself into projects. But this time felt different, as though a silent wall had sprung up between them. One evening, she tried to reconnect the way they once did, cooking his favorite meal, braised short ribs with roasted vegetables. She even prepared a decadent chocolate mousse for dessert, recalling how Jonathan would grin like a child whenever she served it. She set the dining table with fine china and lit scented candles, hoping to create an intimate atmosphere. Jonathan arrived home later than expected. She heard the faint jingle of keys in the foyer and hurried to greet him. His tie was askew, and he looked surprised to see the table set so ornately. "Hey," he said, dropping his briefcase near the door. "What's all this?" Evelyn forced a hopeful smile. "I thought we could have a quiet dinner together. It's been a while since we had a proper meal at home, just the two of us." Jonathan's expression softened momentarily. He stepped forward and kissed her cheek. "That's thoughtful. I'm sorry I'm so late. I had to finalize some details with the Delgado Foundation. There's a deadline for launching a pilot program in Southeast Asia." She ushered him to the table, noting the undercurrent of restlessness in his eyes. "You must be exhausted. Let's eat." They took their seats, and for a while, conversation flowed tentatively. Jonathan complimented the meal, and Evelyn filled him in on her latest hospital fundraiser. They spoke about upcoming charity events, the renovations in the guest wing of their estate. Yet the deeper they got into the evening, the more Evelyn sensed his distraction. At one point, his phone vibrated, and she watched him glance at the screen, lips curving into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Another business matter?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Yes, sorry. Urgent details about tomorrow's strategy call." Evelyn felt an uneasy knot in her stomach. She tried to focus on their meal, but the tension was palpable. Finally, she mustered the courage to ask, "Jonathan, are we all right?" He hesitated. "Of course. Why do you ask?" "It just feels like we haven't been connecting lately, and you've been preoccupied." "I can't help noticing," Jonathan sighed, setting down his fork. "I'm juggling a lot of responsibilities right now. We're on the verge of something big. If this collaboration succeeds, it could redefine what the Montgomery Foundation does on a global scale." Evelyn wanted to ask with whom and why the secrecy, but she held back, not wanting to appear accusatory. Instead, she reached for his hand across the table. "I understand, but I miss you. Really miss you. I feel like I'm living with a ghost sometimes." He squeezed her hand, but his eyes flickered with guilt. "I'm sorry, Evie. I'll try to make more time for us. Let's plan a weekend getaway soon. Just you and me." She nodded, forcing a smile. Yet something told her that a weekend away wouldn't fix what was broken. Jonathan returned to his meal, and though they spoke of simpler things afterward, the undercurrent of uncertainty remained. Later, as they prepared for bed, Jonathan's phone buzzed again. He excused himself to check it in the hallway. Evelyn watched his retreating form, her heart sinking. She climbed under the covers, feeling more alone than ever. Moments later, Jonathan emerged, claiming it was about tomorrow's meeting. Evelyn kissed him goodnight, tasting the distance on his lips. He held her close for a moment, but his mind was 1,000 miles away. That night she barely slept, haunted by the fear that her marriage was slipping through her fingers. In the darkness, she recalled advice her mother once gave. "Don't let silence grow in your marriage. Speak up, even if it hurts to hear the truth." But Evelyn hesitated. She wasn't sure she was prepared for the truth, especially if it involved another woman. And so she let the silence remain, like a quiet fissure growing between them, threatening to split their world wide open. The following weekend, Evelyn traveled upstate to visit her parents. She arrived in the quiet suburb outside Cleveland, stepping into the warm familiarity of her childhood home. Her mother, Nancy, greeted her with a tight hug, the kind that made Evelyn feel safe and loved in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "How are you, sweet girl?" Nancy asked, leading Evelyn into the cozy living room where the aroma of freshly baked cookies hung in the air. "I'm managing," Evelyn replied, sinking into an overstuffed armchair. She glanced around at the photos lining the mantel, snapshots of her as a child, beaming on a swing set, her late father smiling proudly in the background. A wave of nostalgia hit her. Life had been simpler then. Nancy handed her a plate of cookies and a cup of chamomile tea. "Tell me what's going on. I sense something's bothering you." Evelyn stared into the steam rising from her mug. For a moment, she considered brushing off her mother's concerns with a generic excuse about stress or traveling, but the weight in her chest urged her to speak. "Mom, I'm afraid Jonathan and I are drifting apart," she began, voice trembling. She outlined the late nights, the furtive phone calls, the emotional distance that had crept into their marriage. Nancy listened intently, her gentle eyes flickering with worry. When Evelyn finished, there was a heavy pause. "Evelyn," Nancy said softly, "marriage is hard. People grow and change, and sometimes you have to fight to keep each other close. But is there any indication he's seeing someone else?" Evelyn's breath caught. She fiddled with a cookie, breaking it into crumbs. "I don't have concrete proof, but I have this nagging feeling. He's always texting someone. Whenever I enter the room, he becomes guarded." Nancy reached out and squeezed Evelyn's hand. "You need to talk to him, really talk. Let him know you won't accept lies or half-truths. You deserve respect, my dear." Evelyn blinked away tears. "I'm afraid of what I might find out," she admitted. "And I'm afraid of losing him." "That's understandable," Nancy said, her voice steady. "But living in uncertainty can be worse than facing the truth. You have a life to live, Evelyn. Don't let fear hold you back. Her mother's words sank in. Evelyn realized she had been treading water, hoping the problem would fix itself. Maybe it was time to confront Jonathan, to stand up for herself and the love they once shared, even if it risked cracking the fragile shell of their marriage wide open. The next day, she returned to Westchester with a renewed resolve. As fate would have it, Jonathan was away on another business trip, this time to Chicago for an investors' summit. Determined not to let her newfound resolve dissipate, Evelyn busied herself with personal projects. She dedicated hours to her children's hospital fundraiser, meeting with potential donors and finalizing details for a charity banquet. She even joined a local yoga class to regain some mental and emotional balance. One afternoon, she received a call from her friend Bianca. "I'm in town for a few days," Bianca said. "Drinks tonight?" Evelyn hesitated. She had grown so accustomed to living within the confines of her estate that a night out with a friend felt like a foreign concept. But then she thought of her mother's words and realized she should reconnect with people who cared about her. "Sure, why not?" she replied. That evening, they met at a trendy lounge in downtown Manhattan. The bar glimmered with gold accents, and the hum of chatter filled the air. Bianca greeted Evelyn with a tight hug. "You look tired," she remarked, concern etching her brow. Evelyn shrugged. "I've been dealing with a lot." They ordered cocktails and found a secluded corner booth. Under the soft glow of overhead lights, Evelyn poured out her heart, recounting her suspicions and her conversation with her mother. Bianca listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. "Has he ever mentioned anyone in particular?" Bianca inquired. "Anyone he's spending too much time with?" Evelyn chewed on her lip. "He's been talking a lot about someone named Vanessa Delgado. She's involved in a philanthropic collaboration with his foundation. I've never met her, but he's very keen on this partnership." Bianca's eyes narrowed. "Could you look her up? See who she is, what she does. Sometimes a quick search reveals plenty." Evelyn felt a pang of guilt at the idea of spying on Jonathan's associates, but Bianca's logic was compelling. Knowledge, after all, was power. "I might," she said slowly, "but I also feel like Jonathan should be the one to tell me what's going on." Bianca reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand over Evelyn's. "You deserve the truth. If he won't give it freely, sometimes you have to seek it." A swirl of conflicting emotions roiled in Evelyn's chest. She drained the last of her cocktail and exhaled. "I'll figure it out," she said with a mixture of determination and fear. "One way or another." Bianca squeezed her hand. "I'm here for you, no matter what." They parted that night with an embrace that lingered, conveying silent support. On her drive home, Evelyn felt a glimmer of empowerment. There was a new voice in her head, one that demanded answers. If Jonathan was loyal, she'd stand by him and work to mend their broken bond. But if he had strayed, she shook off the thought, unwilling to finish it. Yet deep down, an ember of anger smoldered alongside her sadness. She was Evelyn Montgomery, an intelligent, compassionate woman who had given her all to this marriage. If Jonathan dared betray her, she wouldn't cower in heartbreak. She would stand tall and face the storm head-on. Late in the week, Evelyn attended a high-profile charity auction at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She felt a tinge of anxiety stepping into the grand marble foyer alone, but she reminded herself she was no stranger to these events. Once, she had navigated rooms like this at Jonathan's side, exchanging pleasantries with fellow philanthropists and society figures. Tonight, she would manage on her own. The auction showcased rare artifacts from around the world, and proceeds were slated for various global education initiatives, an event perfectly aligned with Evelyn's passions. Dressed in a sleek black gown that accentuated her graceful figure, she moved through the crowd, exchanging polite nods and brief conversations with familiar faces. She scanned the room, half expecting to see Jonathan. He was, after all, typically present at such gatherings, but he was conspicuously absent. Midway through the night, while studying a painting on display, she heard a polite voice behind her. "Stunning, isn't it?" She turned to see a tall, poised man in an immaculate tailored suit. He had striking features, sharp cheekbones, inquisitive eyes, and an air of confidence that suggested he was no ordinary guest. "Lawrence Chen," he said, offering a hand. Her eyes widened slightly. "Lawrence Chen, I've heard about you, your tech investments, your global ventures." She accepted his handshake, impressed by his firm but warm grip. "I'm Evelyn Montgomery." A spark of recognition lit his gaze. "Montgomery? As in Jonathan Montgomery's wife?" She inclined her head. "That's right." Lawrence smiled, and it reached his eyes, suggesting genuine warmth rather than the practiced politeness she often encountered in wealthy circles. "I've had the pleasure of meeting your husband in a few business settings. He's quite the negotiator, but I believe this is the first time we've crossed paths." Evelyn offered a gracious nod. "It's a pleasure. What brings you here tonight?" He gestured to the painting, a breathtaking work of Renaissance art. "I'm fascinated by art that tells stories of human resilience. This piece speaks volumes about perseverance in the face of adversity." Shifting focus to Evelyn, he added, "And, of course, I'm here to support the education initiatives. I believe in giving back, especially in a world so driven by technology. Education is key." Something about Lawrence's earnestness and the calm intensity in his eyes put Evelyn at ease. They struck up a conversation about the significance of early childhood education, the complexities of running global philanthropic projects, and the importance of responsible leadership in the corporate world. Unlike many men she'd met in these circles, Lawrence seemed genuinely engaged. He asked thoughtful questions, listened attentively, and brought fresh perspectives to topics she cared about. They drifted toward a small seating area near the statue gallery. Over glasses of champagne, they discussed how technology could revolutionize healthcare, how philanthropy could evolve in a digital age. Evelyn felt a flicker of excitement she hadn't experienced in ages. She realized how starved she was for true intellectual and emotional connection. At some point, Lawrence noticed her subtle hesitation. "I hope you don't mind my asking, but is Jonathan here tonight?" Evelyn's posture stiffened slightly. "He was invited, but he had business commitments." Lawrence nodded, seemingly picking up on the unspoken tension. "Such is the life of busy executives," he remarked. "I respect Jonathan's acumen. He's spearheading some remarkable initiatives lately." She thought of Vanessa Delgado and felt her heart clench. "Yes, I've heard about those. I'm still learning the details." Lawrence offered a kind smile. "Sometimes, in the rush to expand, we forget the people who've been there for us all along." "I hope that's not happening to you, Evelyn." His empathetic tone almost unraveled her composure. She managed a polite smile and sipped her champagne, mind reeling. In that moment, she felt seen in a way she hadn't in a long time. It was both comforting and disconcerting. They continued talking until the auction began. When the time came to bid on certain pieces, Evelyn found herself seated next to Lawrence. He won a rare Asian scroll painting, donating a hefty sum that drew appreciative applause from the audience. Throughout the event, he glanced her way now and then, a subtle check-in that felt more personal than he might have intended. At the end of the night, as guests trickled toward the exit, Lawrence offered to walk her to her car. Outside, the city's lights glowed against the dark sky. A crisp breeze rustled the leaves of Central Park across the street. They paused near the curb, reluctant to part ways. "It was a pleasure talking to you tonight," Lawrence said quietly. "You have a genuine heart for philanthropic work. It's refreshing in a world where people often give just for recognition." "Likewise," she replied, gathering her wrap around her shoulders. "You seem to have a sincere passion for making a difference." He hesitated, as if deliberating whether to say more. Then, in a gentle voice, he said, "I hope this isn't the last time we speak. If you ever want to discuss philanthropic ideas or simply need a friend, you can reach out." He handed her his business card, embossed with his name and the logo of his multinational corporation. Evelyn accepted it, her heart fluttering unexpectedly. "Thank you. I appreciate it." As her driver pulled up, she felt a pang of regret at ending the conversation. She offered Lawrence a final smile. "Have a good night." "You too, Evelyn," he replied, stepping aside to let her into the vehicle. On the ride home, she gripped the card, replaying their conversation in her mind. She hadn't intended to connect with anyone tonight, let alone a successful CEO with a reputation for vision and integrity. And yet, she couldn't deny that Lawrence Chen had made a meaningful impression. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of hope, not necessarily romantic, but a reminder that she was still capable of forging true connections. Little did she know how profoundly this chance meeting would shape the course of her life and how it would rattle the delicate foundation of her marriage when Jonathan discovered the new bond forming between his wife and the enigmatic Lawrence Chen. Vanessa Delgado's intentions were far from purely philanthropic. Born into a modest family in Buenos Aires, she had learned early on that beauty, brains, and ambition could propel her far beyond her humble origins. She hadn't built the Delgado Foundation solely from altruism, but from a shrewd understanding that charity opened doors money alone could not. Over time, she had networked with high society, forging alliances that boosted her influence in corporate and philanthropic circles. When Vanessa first encountered Jonathan Montgomery at the gala, she sensed his vulnerability. Wealthy and respected, yes, but beneath that polished exterior lay cracks of loneliness. As their business relationship developed, she tested the boundaries, sending him carefully worded messages late at night, feigning crises that required his urgent input. She commented on his dedication, praising him in ways that fed his ego. Piece by piece, she dismantled his guard. In her sleek penthouse overlooking Central Park, Vanessa reveled in her growing hold over Jonathan. The Delgado Foundation benefited from Montgomery Foundation funds, but more than that, she thrived on the power of seduction. She had done her research. Jonathan was married to a woman deeply respected for her own charitable endeavors. But rumor had it, their marriage was not as solid as it seemed. Vanessa intended to exploit every hairline fracture. One evening, she invited Jonathan to a private cocktail gathering to celebrate the pilot program's launch. It was a modest event at a trendy rooftop bar, limited to a few select donors and associates. Jonathan hesitated, knowing it was short notice and that Evelyn had asked him to come home early for dinner. Yet, the lure of finalizing key details about their collaboration and the subtle undertones of Vanessa's invitation proved irresistible. At the rooftop, the city lights glittered below like fallen stars. Vanessa greeted Jonathan with a warm smile, guiding him toward a secluded table. Despite a handful of other guests mingling nearby, the atmosphere felt intimate. As they toasted the pilot program's success, Vanessa leaned closer, letting her perfume envelop him. "I'm truly grateful for your support, Jonathan," she murmured. "This program wouldn't exist without you." He cleared his throat. "It's a joint effort. You've done most of the groundwork." Her emerald eyes sparkled. "Don't underestimate the weight of your name. Your endorsement opens doors I could never access alone. We make a perfect team." Their conversation flowed easily, peppered with laughter and mutual admiration. At one point, after a spirited discussion about future expansions, Vanessa placed her hand gently on his arm. "We've been working so hard. It's nice to pause and appreciate the moment, isn't it?" Jonathan's pulse quickened. He found himself gazing at her, aware of the charged tension between them. For an instant, thoughts of Evelyn flickered through his mind, her loving smile, the dinners she prepared, the selfless way she dedicated herself to charity. Yet the moment dissolved in a swirl of guilt and desire. At the end of the evening, Vanessa walked him to the elevator. She lightly squeezed his hand, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I hope this is just the beginning of many successes together." He nodded, his throat tight. "Yes. I appreciate everything you've done." She leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. Until next time. The elevator doors slid shut, and Jonathan found himself alone, a rush of conflicting emotions coursing through him: excitement, shame, confusion. Something dangerous was unfolding, and he knew it. Yet he couldn't bring himself to cut ties. Every rational thought told him to refocus on his marriage, to flee temptation, but the magnetic pull of Vanessa Delgado was too strong. Meanwhile, Vanessa returned to the rooftop lounge, her gaze drifting across the city skyline. She was a step closer to her goal. If she could ensnare Jonathan Montgomery fully, she would gain not only financial clout, but also the prestige of being tied to one of New York's most influential families. The risk was high. Should Evelyn Montgomery catch wind of this entanglement, the scandal could be monumental. Yet Vanessa prided herself on navigating scandals with finesse. "Jonathan might not be the first wealthy man I've charmed," she thought, "but he may be the most useful." Vanessa planned to tighten her grip incrementally, yet carefully enough not to scare him away. And if Evelyn became an obstacle, Vanessa would deal with her just as she had dealt with other meddling wives in the past, by portraying herself as the misunderstood partner and painting the wife as cold, unresponsive, or simply unworthy of the successful man in question. The difference this time was that Evelyn Montgomery was no naive socialite. She was respected and well-connected in her own right, a fixture in philanthropic circles. That might complicate matters, but Vanessa wasn't deterred. Her ambition had survived countless obstacles. She would proceed with the cunning she had honed for years. In the coming days, she sent Jonathan affectionate texts, references to their rooftop celebration. She strategically avoided anything overtly explicit. No need to provide incriminating proof, but the tone was unmistakable. Jonathan responded with measured warmth, still resisting full surrender. That only fueled Vanessa's determination further. Little did she know, fate was setting the stage for an even more dramatic turn. Another powerful figure had entered Evelyn Montgomery's life, Lawrence Chen. And once a man of that caliber set his sights on a worthy partner, even Vanessa Delgado might find her grand plans overshadowed. Jonathan stood in his lavish home office, staring at his reflection in the window. It was nearly midnight, and the estate's manicured gardens were bathed in moonlight. He was alone. Evelyn had gone to bed hours ago. A glass of bourbon sat half-finished on his desk. His mind spun with the events of the past few months. He had crossed lines he once believed inviolable. It began with harmless meetings and collaborative efforts, but soon phone calls turned into late-night dinners, which turned into intimate conversations with Vanessa. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He felt the sting of guilt each time he saw Evelyn's worried eyes. And yet, each new day seemed to lure him further into Vanessa's orbit. As he sipped his bourbon, his phone buzzed another message from Vanessa. He hesitated, a wave of self-loathing washing over him. He wanted to ignore it, to hurl the device out the window and reclaim his life before it spiraled out of control. But habit and temptation tugged at him, and he found himself reading it anyway. "Busy day tomorrow. Just wanted to say good night and sweet dreams, Jonathan." He shoved the phone away, heart pounding. Was this the life he wanted? Secret texts, clandestine moments, the lurking fear of discovery. For all his wealth and power, he felt powerless over his own impulses. He remembered the vows he had made to Evelyn years ago, the dreams they had shared of building a legacy together, both philanthropic and familial. Where had that hopeful young man gone? The following afternoon, Jonathan arrived at a charity symposium at the Waldorf Astoria. As he navigated the opulent corridors, nodding politely to acquaintances, he spotted Evelyn across the room. She wore a navy blue dress that complemented her poised elegance. Though she conversed with a small group, her smile didn't fully reach her eyes. He realized with a jolt that he had been absent from her world far too long. Summoning courage, he approached after she finished her conversation. "Evelyn," he said softly, "can we talk?" She regarded him, carefully guarded. Of course. They found a quiet alcove near a large potted palm. He searched her face, noting the subtle lines of stress around her eyes. "I've missed you," he confessed. She didn't respond immediately, crossing her arms. "That's odd. You've been busy, hardly home at all." Her words stung, but he knew he deserved it. "I know I've neglected us. Things have gotten complicated with the Foundation's new collaborations." Evelyn studied him, something steely in her gaze. "Jonathan, I'm not ignorant. I see how you are these days, always on your phone, texting late at night, coming home at ungodly hours. If there's something I should know, just tell me." His pulse quickened. He could come clean right now, say he'd been flirting with danger, admit he was entangled with Vanessa Delgado, but fear choked him. Instead, he offered half-truths. It's just intense negotiations. Overseas expansions. Nothing you need to worry about. Her eyes flickered with disappointment. "Fine." She turned to leave. In a moment of desperation, he grabbed her hand. "Evie, wait, I'm sorry. Let's go somewhere this weekend, just the two of us. We can talk properly." Evelyn paused, considering. "I have a commitment on Saturday, a philanthropic brunch for the hospital, but we can talk Sunday." He nodded. "Yes, Sunday then. We'll go to the lake house if you'd like." She sighed, pulling her hand away. "We'll see." Then she walked off, leaving him filled with a suffocating blend of remorse and relief. Little did Jonathan know, the next day would unravel a shocking turn of events. Evelyn attended that philanthropic brunch, a gathering teeming with investors, socialites, and business magnates. Among them was Lawrence Chen, who had made it clear he admired Evelyn not just for her charitable spirit, but for the graceful woman she was. Something inside Lawrence resonated with her vulnerability, and something inside Evelyn gravitated to his unwavering confidence. Later that evening, Jonathan left a meeting with Vanessa at a private lounge. They had congratulated themselves on the success of another funding milestone. In a moment of carefree intoxication, fueled by champagne and the flush of victory, Vanessa leaned in and hugged him tight. Just as she did, a paparazzo's camera flashed from a distant corner, capturing the embrace in stark clarity. Jonathan froze, dread filling his stomach. Vanessa brushed it off with a laugh. "Relax, darling. No one will believe anything's happening. It's just a hug." But as they parted ways, Jonathan's mind raced with the ramifications. He knew how swiftly rumors spread. He realized he'd been playing with fire. Now the flames threatened to consume him. Sure enough, the very next morning, gossip columns began swirling. Montgomery billionaire in warm embrace with beautiful philanthropist. The photograph made the rounds among high society. Though the tabloids were discreet with names, anyone in the know could identify Jonathan and Vanessa. Word traveled quickly in their circles. Late that afternoon, a colleague discreetly showed Jonathan an online piece referencing the photo. Panic seized him. He scrambled, calling his PR team to contain the story. They assured him they'd spin it as a harmless photo taken out of context. But the damage was done. Whispers had begun, and soon the news would reach Evelyn if it hadn't already. Jonathan's regret deepened into dread. He had never meant for things to go this far. Now, the foundation of his marriage, already riddled with cracks, might be on the brink of collapse. As he hurried to his car, phone buzzing incessantly with calls and messages, he realized with sinking clarity that he stood to lose the one person who had been there from the very start, Evelyn. The scandalous photo circulated among elite circles with lightning speed. It reached Evelyn via an innocuous text from a friend. "Have you seen this? Call me if you need anything." At first, she didn't want to look, dreading the possibility that her worst suspicions had been confirmed. But she forced herself to open the link. There, splashed across a gossip site, was Jonathan holding Vanessa Delgado in a close embrace, their faces lit with shared warmth. Evelyn's stomach churned, even though she'd sensed his distance for months. Seeing visual proof felt like a punch to the gut. She stared at the photo, heart pounding, tears threatening to well in her eyes. Part of her wanted to smash the phone against the wall, to rage at Jonathan for betraying her trust. But in the swirl of hurt, another voice, calmer, more resolute, told her to remain composed. "Don't let them see you break." That afternoon, she attended a major charity function at the Marriott Marquis, determined not to hide. The event aimed to secure funds for advanced pediatric equipment, an initiative close to her heart. She put on a poised facade, greeting donors with her usual grace, but inside she was unraveling. As she made her rounds, she spotted Lawrence Chen in the crowd. He appeared momentarily startled to see her, as though attuned to the turmoil flickering behind her eyes. Politely excusing himself from his companions, he approached her. "Evelyn, She managed a feeble smile. "Hello, Lawrence." He gently guided her to a quieter corner. "I heard some rumors," he said, scanning her expression. "Are you all right? You seem shaken." She swallowed hard, forcing a tight nod. "I'm fine, just focusing on the event." Yet her eyes betrayed her pain. Without another word, Lawrence handed her a glass of water. "You need to stay hydrated. I've seen how these gatherings can be draining even under normal circumstances." She accepted it, touched by his consideration. "Thank you," she murmured, meeting his concerned gaze. In that moment, his kindness nearly shattered the dam of her pent-up emotions. The rest of the event was a blur. She gave a brief speech about improving children's healthcare, and the applause rang hollow in her ears. All she could think about was the photograph, Jonathan's arms wrapped around Vanessa. By the time the event concluded, Evelyn felt emotionally drained, on the verge of tears. While guests filed out, Lawrence lingered. "Evelyn, come with me," he said quietly. "I have a car waiting. Let's talk somewhere private." Normally she would have declined, wary of fueling more rumors. But she was too weary to care about appearances. She allowed him to lead her outside to a sleek black sedan. They drove to a secluded rooftop lounge. He frequented a place with soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and panoramic views of the city. They settled onto a plush sofa near a glass railing. The skyline shimmered below, a sea of lights stretching into infinity. A waiter brought 2 cups of tea, and Lawrence nodded in thanks before turning his full attention to Evelyn. "Talk to me," he said gently. Evelyn stared into the steaming cup, her voice trembling. "I don't know where to begin. I've spent months trying to salvage my marriage, thinking if I gave Jonathan space, he'd come back to me." She wiped away a tear that escaped her eye. "But I was so naive." Lawrence's gaze was steady, filled with empathy. "You deserve honesty, respect, love. If he's not giving you that, you have every right to demand it or walk away." She sniffled, trying to collect herself. "I never thought I'd be in this position. But seeing that photo, I can't pretend anymore." Lawrence exhaled, his features softening with compassion. "Evelyn, you're a remarkable woman. Any man would be lucky to have you by his side. Don't ever forget that." She looked at him, her heart fluttering strangely. "Thank you. You've been very kind, but I don't know what to do next." Something flickered in his eyes, a resolve. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Evelyn's breath caught, uncertain of what was happening. Slowly, Lawrence opened it, revealing a glittering diamond ring that reflected the city lights like a shattered rainbow. "Evelyn," he said, his voice trembling with earnest emotion. "We haven't known each other long, but I feel something with you that I've never felt before. I see your grace, your passion, your integrity, and I can't stand by while someone betrays you. Please hear me out. I want to be the man who gives you the love and respect you deserve. Will you marry me?" Stunned, Evelyn's mind reeled. She felt a rush of conflicting emotions: shock, disbelief, a surprising undercurrent of excitement. She had just learned of her husband's betrayal, and now a powerful CEO was proposing marriage on a moonlit rooftop. It felt surreal, like stepping into a dream, or perhaps a maelstrom of chaos. She drew a shaky breath. "Lawrence, this is so unexpected. My marriage," he covered her hand with his. "I know you're still married, but I had to speak my truth. I can't bear to lose you to a man who doesn't value you. I'm willing to wait if that's what it takes. But I want you to know my intentions are serious." Tears spilled onto her cheeks, and for a moment she gazed out at the vast city below. Jonathan's betrayal flashed through her mind, mingling with the memory of how Lawrence had consistently shown her respect and compassion. She felt an overwhelming urge to break free from the hurt and find a new path, but the decision was monumental. She sniffed, glancing at the ring. "Lawrence, I can't answer right now. My life is in turmoil. I need time to process, to make sense of everything." He nodded, carefully closing the box. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here waiting for you." In that quiet rooftop lounge, with the city shimmering beneath them, Evelyn realized she stood at a crossroads. One path led back to Jonathan, to a marriage rocked by deceit. The other promised a fresh start, but at a dizzying pace that left her unsure of her own heart. Torn between betrayal and the hope of new love, she could only cling to the promise that whatever she chose, she would do so with her head held high. Heart-pounding, Jonathan stood on the balcony of his estate, scrolling through the viral photo of Evelyn and Lawrence Chen, the moment that changed everything. A friend had just sent it to him, Lawrence, down on one knee, holding out a ring to Evelyn. She wore a stunned expression, torn by the gravity of the proposal. In that instant, Jonathan understood the full weight of his mistakes. He had risked his marriage for a fleeting thrill, and now his beloved wife was receiving the devotion he'd failed to provide from a man even more powerful than himself. Will Evelyn accept Lawrence's proposal and embark on a new beginning, leaving Jonathan to mourn the collapse of the life they'd once built together? Or will Jonathan fight for redemption before it's too late? The answer depends on whether love can survive betrayal and whether a single moment of regret can ever outweigh 1,000 acts of neglect. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster of passion, betrayal, and second chances in Millionaire. Husband regrets hugging mistress when he sees his wife being proposed to by a CEO. If you've been captivated by Evelyn's quest for self-respect, touched by Jonathan's desperate regrets, or intrigued by Lawrence's bold pursuit of love, we invite you to continue this journey with us. Want to discover what happens next? Will Evelyn find it in her heart to forgive Jonathan, or will she accept the hand of the successful CEO who truly sees her worth? Your support keeps these stories alive. If you enjoyed this tale, please remember to like this video, share it with friends who love high-stakes drama, and subscribe to our channel for more enthralling stories filled with twists, turns, and unforgettable characters. Your engagement means the world to us. Thank you.